This is a demo of the journal allocation tool for Dynamics 365 Business Central by Lighthouse Experts Group. The journal allocation tool allows you to run allocations on journal lines and on document lines. You can allocate lines by GL accounts or dimension combinations and split by percentages or using fixed amounts. This can be useful for organizations where journal or document lines often need to be allocated to different departments, projects, or more generally, any combination of dimensions. Once the journal allocation tool add-on is installed, the first page you want to look at is the allocation setup worksheet. So I'll head over there now. The allocation setup worksheet is a page that contains all the allocations that you've set up. And in order to define the different allocations, it's just a matter of creating different allocation codes that are unique and then setting them all up in this table. So this is the bulk of the work that's going to be done up front. And then once this table is set up, it's just a matter of using these allocations on your journals or your documents. So in this example, you can see I've set up multiple different allocations, each with a unique allocation code, and I'll explain a little bit about what each of these fields do. So the allocation code, as I mentioned, is just a unique code that you can decide on, and you can have as many of these as you want in this table. For each allocation code, you can have as many lines as you want, depending on how many allocation lines you want to create with that allocation. Account type, account number, balancing account type, and balancing account number. Those should be familiar from most journals or documents within Business Central, and they work exactly the same way. So you can select what type of account type you want, same with balancing account type. And then once you have selected an account type, the account number will automatically update the dropdown based on what's in your account type. So in this case, I have a GL account, meaning that when I look up the dropdown, it's going to show the chart of accounts. Whereas for a vendor line, this would show the vendor list and so on. So the idea here is that if you leave this blank, it will just copy the data from the original line that you're allocating from. So if I have a line that's allocated, in this case, 10 and 90%, all the fields from the original line will just get copied as is onto the allocation lines. Whereas for the lines where I define a specific account, that just tells the tool, okay, when you allocate a line based on this department allocation, override the account type, account number, and so on with these values. And so in this case of the department allocation, it'll split the line 51%, 49%, and then the 51% line will get this account number and the 49% line will get this account number. Same idea with whether you select a vendor, an IC partner, or fixed asset, whatever you end up deciding to allocate by, you can do that here. Currency code, if you need to allocate lines to different currency codes, that can be specified here. Amount and allocation percent are usually used either or. So if I'm using an allocation percent, which is the vast majority of cases that I see, your amount will be zero. If you decide to use a fixed amount, then your allocation percentage will be zero. So it's only using one or the other. The way the fixed amount works is let's say, for example, you have a sales invoice and you're always charging a shipping cost or a handling cost or some sort of administrative fee, and it's always the same amount. You can specify those here, and when you run the allocation, doesn't matter what the original line is, it's just going to create these fixed allocation lines below them with the exact amounts that you specify here. Now, in most cases, what I see is that typically people will use an allocation percentage, meaning that if I have an original line for, say, $1,000 and I run it with this allocation, I'll get 10% of that $1,000 on the first line, so $100, and 90% or $900 on the second line. Over on the right side here has to do with the dimensions you want on your allocated lines. So if you just want to copy your dimensions from the original line, you would just check this box like I did in this case. So no matter how many allocation lines you end up creating, they'll get the same exact dimensions as were on the original line. Now, in this case, for example, where I've left this unchecked, but I've left the dimensions blank, this means that the allocated lines will actually get no dimensions at all. And in the case where you want to specify your dimensions, which again is the most common case, you would just enter the dimension values you want on the allocated lines that you're creating. Now, one thing to note here is that uh, once you install the app, you'll get your 8 shortcut dimensions in here, and these just correspond to the same shortcut dimensions you have in your general ledger setup. So in my case, this is my demo environment. I've got 4 shortcut dimensions already set up: department, customer group, area code, and project code. I can go and create a 5th shortcut dimension or a 6th shortcut dimension tomorrow, and this will pick it up automatically in this table. So there's nothing else for me to do in terms of setup or reinstalling anything. They'll just get automatically picked up based on whatever's in your general ledger setup on that day. And it won't delete any of your data or anything like that. One more thing to note is that when filling out this table, some people prefer to use the open in Excel and edit in Excel functionality, which is standard across much of Business Central on most pages where you have this sort of journal type format. You can do the editing of the journal in Excel and it'll just copy everything back into here when you're done. This page also works with that same functionality if you find that easier to use. Now, there's also another version of this journal allocation tool where we've actually been asked to add some IC fields from the IC general journal. So in some cases, if you need to do intercompany allocations using IC partner codes, then we can add these fields onto your allocation setup worksheet so that if you run the allocation on the IC general journal, you'll actually be able to fill in the IC fields along with all the other fields that you have on your allocated lines. So that's one version of the tool that we have available if that's something you're interested in. Now, once this table is completely filled in, I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to run the allocation itself. So I'll go back to my Gen Journal. I already have a few lines set up here, which I'll use for this example. In this case, there's only one column I want to mention, which is the allocation code. So the reason for this column is that let's say you have many, many lines of allocations and you don't need to allocate them all the same way. In the previous version of this tool, we would have you select specific lines, run the allocation, and then you would tell the tool which allocation code you want to use, and it would run the allocation on these 2 lines. But let's say you have 1,000 lines and you have 50 different allocations you want to run on those 1,000 lines. This quickly becomes quite cumbersome. So the solution to this that we decided to implement was to create an allocation code field right on the journal line, so that if you had 1,000 line journal and you wanted to allocate different lines in different ways, you would just enter the allocation code directly on that line. And if the line's blank, it would just skip it. It wouldn't do any allocation for that line. So in this case, what I would do here is I would just pick an allocation code. Let's say I'll do 80/20 for this one. For this one, I'll do the first one, which I think was 90/10. And maybe I'll do this one as the simple allocation. And then in order to run this, once I have all my allocation codes set up on my lines, I would just go into this line tab. And once the add-on is installed, it'll create an option called Allocate. And this Allocate button will be available on most journals and documents within Business Central. Now, to run the allocation, like I mentioned, I would just set up these allocation codes and hit the Allocate button. Now I'm presented with a pop-up that gives me 2 options. So the first option says, do you want to keep the original lines? So once you do the allocation, if I leave this blank, it'll just delete all the original lines, and all you'll be left with is the allocated lines. In this case, I'll just click to keep the original lines. The second option is flip sign. So if I decide to flip the sign, that just tells the tool that once you create the allocated lines, flip the sign on the amount. So meaning that if I have a 50/50 split of $1,000 line, the $500 lines would be -500. And the reason for this is that let's say you end up keeping the original lines. A lot of people decide to flip the sign if they want to keep their journal in balance. So I'll just go ahead and run this. It's very quick. The allocation's all done. So you could see that the original lines and the allocated lines stay together, meaning that this was $100 on the original line, and the 90-10 split, the two lines end up right below. Um, if you have different accounts, so for example, in this situation, I don't think I picked an allocation code that had a different account, but let's say my allocation lines had a different GL account specified, those would just show up on the allocated lines. And if I had dimensions selected for those lines, they would show up here. So it looks like this one had allocated lines with the ADM department code, and the second allocated line has the sales department code. So the split is done on the original amount. The flip sign tells the tool to make these negative so that your journal stays in balance. And same idea for the other two lines. So I think these were the original three lines. And here below, we've got the 10-90 split. I think this one was 80-20, and then this 60-30 and 10 with the flip sign and whatever dimensions and fields you ended up selecting on your allocation setup worksheet. And that's really about it. If there's any additional functionality that you need for your business that aren't part of the base journal allocation tool, let us know and we can customize the add-on to work with any of your specific business requirements. So for example, if there's an additional field you need on the allocation setup worksheet, or there's some custom field you have in your journal that you would like to work a different way with the allocation tool, let us know and we can customize the tool to work with those requirements. And if you'd like to see a live demo or ask any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@lighthouseexperts.com.